I want to show you some examples of where we used crush spacers in the 2023 Charged Up robot. So the first place you'll see, we used these churro crush spacers in a lot of the elevator tubes. If I do a section view on here, you'll be able to see a lot better. So you can see inside of these elevator tubes there are a bunch of crush spacers. And these were very difficult to get in and to move around. And we almost had to remake one of these tubes because there was a crush spacer jammed in there so badly that we thought we were going to have to cut it to get it out. Another place was these elevator uprights. So we've got one over here and one over here. If I do a section view on this tube here, you'll be able to see that inside of the tube right here, there is a crush spacer. And if I move this view a little bit, you can see this chassis tube here, we actually were able to bolt through the wall. You see the clearance holes for the bolt heads, and the bolts went through here. We were able to get away with that because if you look, this chassis tube has an 1/8 inch thick wall. You know, a thick, strong wall there, and this tube here has only a 1/16 wall, or actually it was Rev Max tube, it was only 40 thousandths of an inch. So these were just regular crush spacers. But then there are some other places in the chassis itself where we used crush spacers. So one example is if I go here, I do another section view, for attaching the swerve module, which is this piece here, to this front chassis tube. Let me move this view so you can see the edge a little bit. So here's the front chassis tube. We had a crush spacer inside of there for the 3 screws that anchor the swerve module. And you can also see on this view that we're starting to get into another crush spacer. Let me section this differently so you can see. So this one, this is a cousin of a crush spacer. It's not a crush spacer itself, but it performs a similar function. And again, because we had thick wall tube here, we actually didn't use a crush spacer. We attached individually to each side of the tube. So this is hard to see here, especially since the fasteners weren't modeled in this big chassis assembly. And because the chassis assembly is so slow, I didn't want to insert those. But I created a mock-up here. So this is that same, a similar chassis tube. And inside of it is a nut holder. So let's do an exploded view here so that you can see. I've already made this. If we pull the screws out, pull this gusset off the top, pull the crush spacer out of the tube, or pull the nut holder out of the tube, you can see, let's go to the end here, you can see that we had a bunch of nuts in these hexagonal pockets. So these hexagonal pockets effectively form the wrench so that you don't need to hold the other end of the nut, so that you've got a steel threaded hole inside of your chassis. So if we watch this a little bit more slowly now, you put the nuts into the part, you slide the part into the tube, and then you can bolt stuff to the top of the tube. And it was a very convenient thing, especially for parts that were coming on and off very often, like bumpers, to have the nuts built in. So we didn't have to bolt all the way through and have someone hold the nut on the bottom. You just put the screw in from the top and that was it. This is a section view of this piece. I'm cut about halfway through, as you can see. And as you can also see, these screws anchor this gusset only to the top side of this chassis tube. They don't go all the way through the way that the crush spacers allow you to do. And this was fine for these 1/8 inch thick wall parts. It was not fine for thin wall tubing, and we had several failures that way.